Hey, everybody, welcome to the TPIM SR Live. I'm your host, TruePowerIsMine, and today we have Judge Joe Brown back in the house again. It's going to be exciting, educational, hopefully funny. We are wrapping up the end of Black History Month, as it were, in the next few days or next week or so. And Judge, just leading off, uh, back to Martin Luther King. We spoke on him on past shows, and as everyone know or should know by now, you were one of the last judges to actually hear that case. And could you just reiterate real quick, who do you believe might have actually killed Dr. King?
I don't believe anything. I never believe in things. I have opinions subject to modification with acquisition of better knowledge, information, data, belief, and analysis.
Yes.
Now, what my opinion is that Dr. Martin Luther King was shot from the fire station across the street from the Lorraine Motel by a two-man hit team using an XM21, which was a specially converted M14.
Wow.
It had a suppressor on it. It's not a silencer. There's still a lot of noise, but it makes it hearing safe, and it disguises the sound signature. And it was using subsonic ammunition, which was of reduced power. And the shot did not come from the flop house. It didn't come from the bushes. And what happens is if a shot came from where my opinion directs it, then there would be an interesting echo that would cast the sound back where the bushes are. Interestingly enough, nobody ever speaks of this, but the bushes and the flop house window are directly in line with the balcony. So it is what it is. Couldn't have been from the flop house because, as the Homicide Bureau of the Police Department notes, and is now noted in the Civil Rights Museum exhibit, there was a tree growing between the window of the flop house bathroom and the Lorraine Motel. You couldn't see the hotel from there, and the police arrived 5-10 minutes after the shooting. The tree was up. While they were doing investigation on the scene, the tree was cut down by somebody. So there is that. And it's interesting. Anybody that was in the bushes would have had to have been viewing on open view from literally Main Street for 5.5 hours, which would have been rather awful. So there are a number of things in there. And the bullet they pull out of King's body is identical with a lot of ammunition, or a sizable lot of ammunition. They call it a lot, meaning it's all of the same nature, that the FBI got late December 1967 on invoice. And also they got 5 of the rifles that match the ballistic characteristics of what shot King. And they were very unique ones. And what they pulled out of King was very unique. Ray's rifle is not even close ballistically.
And are these bullets still in existence, the one that they removed from it?
The pictures were in the evidence room and the file of the case. The FBI stripped the jacket into 3 pieces and sliced the core into 3 vertical pieces. They were in the evidence room, but I had to detain the medical examiner who was trying to remove them from the courthouse so he could use them for a lecture.
A confidential.
However, the bullet fragments were not distorted, and they were quite easily analyzed. I had them analyzed using scanning electron microscopy. And that's how I learned about the rate of rifling twist. They had a peculiar rifling twist. That is, for firearms, there are spiral grooves in the barrel that cause the bullet to spin, which causes it to stabilize and fly truer than it would if it were unstabilized. And the rate of the rifle that shot King was the bullet would make one complete turn in every 11 1/4 inches. raised rifle, the bullet makes a complete turn in 10 inches. And the standard M14 and most 308s would make one turn in every 12 inches, one turn per foot of bell.
Wow. Wow.
So they got 5 of them, serial number X through Y, etc. Late December 1967, I've seen the invoices, and Robert Kennedy ordered that they be returned to the Defense Department since they wanted to use them as an experimental thing in the now.
Oh.
And the FBI was only able to return 4, claiming that somehow or another in the intervening 4 months they had lost one. That's the murder weapon.
And all these people who benefited, because yesterday I did a show about the origins of the NAACP, and we all know that Dr. King worked with that organization. Would it be a safe factual point to point out that the NAACP did have communist elements in its early beginnings?
No, that's not the way we're going with that one. NAACP was remotely connected with this. The NAACP had kind of lost its clout by 1967. It and Dr. King were passe. Nobody was interested in King in 1967 because everybody was giving the power fist, saying, I'm black and I'm proud, power to the people, burn, baby, burn it to the ground. H. Brown was saying, we got revolution in our pockets, and he had famously hold up and light up a match. Stokely Carmichael was talking. The Panther Party was patrolling the neighborhoods with guns. And the college campuses were having BSUs take over buildings, burn buildings, and in 64, 5, and 6, black folk had risen up in rebellion and burnt down center cities. So, our inner cities. So it is what it is. And the FBI was behind this whole thing. And that was because Hoover had made a name for himself being anti-communist.
Right.
And he was, along with the FBI and certain other factions, not worried at all about civil rights. What they were worried about is somebody like King galvanizing the anti-war movement and, to a lesser extent, revitalizing labor. That's why he was in Memphis for a labor strike. So that's what they were worried about. The FBI has always been a political animal. It started off as the Bureau of Investigation because the feds had no investigative bureau. And one of the first tasks they were assigned was investigating the transport across state lines of white women by black men. Specifically, they were targeting the first black world heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson, who had a white entourage, entourage of white women, and had a white wife. So they got what they needed to get him arrested when he crossed Georgia on a train with his wife. And since Georgia didn't recognize interracial marriage, we called it miscegenation. And they arrested him when he got off, and then that led to the Mann Act, which is still in effect till today. J. Edgar Hoover got his start by investigating and interviewing the prostitutes in the New York brothels, and they gave him blackmail information on prominent politicians of the day. So he used that blackmail information to advance.
And he did.
And the other thing is you can see this on the Smithsonian Channel and the American History Channel. It's now come to light that J. Edgar Hoover was a black man. He was passing, and his family was forced to leave Louisiana because they were allegedly passing for white, and the Klan burned a bunch of crosses in their yard. So Hoover always hated the Klan. Memphis was an ideal location because within a 70-mile radius of Memphis, Medgar Evers had been assassinated, Emmett Till had been lynched, the 3 civil rights workers had been killed and buried in a levee. And by the way, Hoover worked up a deal with the mob where they gave him the benefit of one of their enforcers who kidnapped the Klan dragon, tortured him for a few days, got a handwritten statement which detailed in the form of a confession the murder of the 3 civil rights workers and where their bodies could be found, buried in a levee.
Wow.
So Memphis is the first-degree murder capital of America. And even today, they've got people involved with the district attorney's office who are complicit in murder and drug trafficking on a major scale.
And they're on
And the elected district attorney in Memphis right now, second decade of the 21st century, third decade of the 21st century, has been listed as the most corrupt DA in America by Harvard, Yale, and Stanford law schools law reviews. They find that she personally has more findings of prosecutorial misconduct against her than any other office in the country has collectively. And she tried to fix the case in front of me too, way back in the 90s. It was somebody had 4 kilos of coke, many hits of crystal meth, LSD, quaaludes, heroin, and all this other stuff. And she was trying to get me to accept the plea without specifying the drug amounts to let the female defendant have the case dropped and the male defendant get 1 year unsupervised probation up front and have the case dismissed at the end of a year. I didn't go for that, and I investigated further and found out what drug amounts were involved and set the plea aside, set it for trial.
Wow.
And refused to let it go back to the courtroom it came from. So he wound up copping out to 10 years.
See, this is what I was wanting to ask you about Roger Stone. You hit it on the head when I asked you about President Trump. Was he going to get impeached or not? You know, when that was all up in the air, you said no. Roger Stone, do you think President Trump will actually pardon him?
He could. He's got every right to. The pardon power of the president is very sacrosanct under the Constitution, so that no one could engage in tyrannical behavior. Lincoln exercised it liberally. So has every other president. Usually they don't exercise it until they are deep in the middle of their second term or they're getting ready to leave office after being defeated. But it's unquestioned. They have unquestioned, unrestricted power to pardon or commute.
And that's any sentence from child molestation to capital murder?
No, it's got to be federal.
Oh, it just has to be a federal. So drug charges, marijuana charges, things of that nature.
Yeah, well, here, for example, you remember the BP rig that blew out in the Gulf?
Yes.
They indicted 23 people. Obama's trust fund was heavily invested in British Petroleum, and Obama quietly pardoned all 23 BP executives who were involved.
Wow. So that's the power. That's the
power. And you got a personal interest. See, ordinarily what happens when you get elected president, you have to surrender all of your personal assets to a trustee, and he's supposed to quietly sell them, secretly sell them, and acquire assets of like value that you don't know about, so you can't use your office to influence what happens. However, when there are others, particularly an extended family, siblings and such like, you can't do that. So the president still has family knowledge of what's going on with his investments or the family investments. And Obama was a 1/3 beneficiary of a trust fund where all of the assets of his late stepfather / adopted father had been deposited. That individual, Lolo Sotoro, was one of the 10 to 15 richest men on earth. Yes. So Barack Obama was not a homeboy. He is, in fact, the richest person to ever sit in the White House.
And he actually got richer sitting in the White House, like many people.
Oh, yes, he did. Business Insider reported his 2018 income at $570+ million net. That's after all taxes and expenses. Nobody reports that kind of income as a net.
Wow. I mean, the figures are just mind-boggling. You know, I mean, excuse me.
He didn't collect because I think there was something else going on with him, but he got in, and then once he's out, you know, there's no point not collecting. Daddy is dead. He went to a high school that at the time he went had a tuition of $45,000 a year, not including room and board. I know, because I was almost going to send one of my near-to-well sons to that, my oldest one who has problems, to that thing 20 years ago. And at that time, the tuition was $95,000 a year.
Wow.
But not including room and board. He didn't get to go. I wasn't going to reward him for misconduct. I got it from his mama. I'd been divorced from her for years. But anyway, I'm informed that school charges almost between $120,000 and $140,000 a year now to go there.
Now, Judge, can you explain to the people, to the common layman, why is it so important for a child to go to a school like this? Is it just the education, or is it something else that the child benefits?
It's not only the education, it's a way of thought, it's an approach to life, and most importantly, it's the connections and a way of thinking. See, you go to a typical school and you got people, you better not lay a hand on my child, you better not blah, 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 and there's no discipline and control, and then there they dump the kids. You have fathers who, like his, Obama's stepfather, adopted father, Lolo, who ran the Gestapo units for the Indonesian army, the death squads, which did a lot of business, 1959, 60, and 61, and also did a lot of contract killing for the American CIA through George Herbert Walker Bush, who was a long-term, close and personal friend of Obama's adopted father, Lolo Sotoro. Lolo Sotoro was an oil baron also in Indonesia. Indonesia sits on what may be the world's largest oil reserve. Sotoro was international executive vice president for Standard Oil, and Standard Oil couldn't get into Indonesia due to American laws. And they helped set up Lolo Sotoro so he could. So he killed off all rivals and became the oil baron for Indonesia, and he made a fortune. Now, for those who don't know, you should know, Standard Oil is now Exxon.
Right.
So Barack's adopted father was international executive vice president for the Exxon folk. And they sponsored him, and he sat on top of the world's largest oil reserves, and he became a filthy rich person. He had two other half siblings. Mother had two more children when she married Lolo, and Barry being adopted. Well, Barack, his name all through his school was officially Barry Sotoro.
Correct.
So he's a rich boy. And he and Michelle worked for the oldest Republican-oriented law firm in America. They were so old that they literally financed Abraham Lincoln's first run for U.S. president.
Wow.
So they had elephants on the toilet paper, and that's who they worked for. His community service stuff he talked about was actually, when he said community organizer, Chicago had granted homestead property interest to anybody that came in and renovated properties in this extremely blighted area. So once they had fixed it up and gotten title, Obama's firm represented this, well, the firm Obama worked for represented these developers, and they had Barack Obama going around soft talking the black holders of the property rights to selling them to this developer. It's a fraud. It's really bad. You know, this thing where George W. Bush and Michelle always giggle when he's giving her candy, which he's done in public quite a few times.
Yes.
The inside joke is that he's giving her the same kind of candy he used to give her husband when Barry was 7, 8 years old.
But they were all family.
Imagine.
They're all family.
The Bushes and the Sotoros mean Barack Obama hung together. They grew up around each other.
And now hindsight, Judge, it makes sense why Obama did what he did in office. I mean, some would even argue that he was almost an agent for Goldman Sachs as well.
It was. They financed his trust fund, and his father used Goldman Sachs. And when I say father, if you adopt somebody at 2 years old, you're the daddy. You
Correct.
know, his father used Goldman Sachs as his American financier, so to speak. The firm Obama was with represented Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs' daddy used that law firm. Hillary Clinton's daddy worked for Goldman Sachs. Out of Chicago, Obama appointed Geithner as Treasury Secretary. Geithner was the chief consultant for Goldman Sachs. The first two people he got on the Supreme Court, those women who were lesbian Catholics, they all had worked for Goldman Sachs. The last person he nominated, a conservative far-right Republican that did not get approved, he worked for Goldman Sachs. Cruz, his wife worked for Goldman Sachs. You see where this thing goes? Yeah. When Obama ran for president in 2007, they had him in New York for a day-long conference with the upper staff echelons of Goldman Sachs. And then again, 2008, when he was running, they had Tom Brokaw moderate a day-long meeting with all of the employees and executives of Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs was the biggest corporate contributor to Obama's election.
Wow.
Also, one night, LGBT in California raised about $8.5 million for him. And he was our second gay president.
Who was the first?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan?
He was an actor, B-grade actor in Hollywood. Chairman of the Screen Actors Guild.
Captain of the casting couch.
And LGBT claims that 85 to 90% of all people who worked in Hollywood over the last 50, 60 years have been charter members of the organization.
The Skittles Club. You know, speaking of Hollywood.
They taste the rainbow, feel the rainbow.
Whether you want to or not. Don't you find it odd, Judge?
Yeah. Well, you don't have to. Some don't. But it's a weak thing to say I had to do it. That's crap. You can always quit that mess and get a real job.
That is true. That is true. But
being in Hollywood is not a real job. Imagine your whole adult life, your job, your task to earn money is make-believe.
And it's so devastating. People believe it. People believe the characters. Yeah. You know, I was going to ask you a question. Confidential informant want me to ask you. He stated Do you find it odd that Kobe Bryant is dead? You know, and everyone's so quick to bring up his misgivings, but we have this
No,
Weinstein.
there's no reason to kill him. He didn't do anything to shake anything up.
No, it was an accident, but the way the media keeps bringing up like the deal that happened in the hotel room when we have Harvey Weinstein and no one talks about him.
They have made it clear over the last 50 years that the only way feminism as they want it will really take hold is to, one, destroy the family, two, to destroy masculinity, three, they have no scruples about lying, cheating, or whatever it is, misleading, or doing whatever is necessary by any means necessary. And 50 some years ago, I heard them dedicate themselves at various college campuses to taking over the print, television, and motion picture industries so that they could control the propaganda industry. Literally, they said this out loud on speeches and rallies and stuff. And what they've done is an ideal exhibition of what the Nazis found out when it came to running a propaganda engine.
Man.
It's insidious.
It is.
By the way, they are not as widespread as they want you to think. And one of the propaganda methods is, if you have, the way I studied it, it would be expressed like this by one professor. He says, imagine, if you will, there's a room with 100 people in there. 95 of the people think the same way. 5 people think very differently. Those 5 people control the press, and they would have the 95 people thinking that they are 1 or 2 thinking like oddballs compared to the other 95, rather than being part of the majority.
Excellent.
But it tells you how wide they are. Like Marvel Comics, since they acquired it from the late Stan Lee, has made several public announcements that they intend to either create or convert 50% of their superheroes to gay or tranny status. Michael Jackson was pushed by the media. He wasn't doing well before Spielberg made that video Thriller.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought that record Thriller out that had been dead for almost 2 years, and they revitalized it, and it went international with that video. And he was stated to be androgynous, no sex at all. See, humans in our culture, the majority culture of the world, they clothe themselves at most times so you can't see what's underneath.
Exactly.
So he came across as androgynous, so you couldn't tell. So their goal was to push him to set the stage for this transvestite thing, these cross dressers with a clothes fetish, so that you couldn't tell what was underneath the clothes. So people would stop thinking in terms of male and female. Now they have taken gender, which 35 years ago used to be synonymous with sex, or sexual, not orientation, but your sex, male, female, XXXY, with some freak exceptions of extra chromosome stuck in here someplace. And they've taken gender, the word that was simultaneous and synonymous with sex, and now they've converted it from sex, which dealt with your sexual plumbing, and they have turned it neutral. Sex is fluid. Michael Jackson was androgynous to set the stage for fluid gender expression, and the trannies are being pushed by LGBTQ, et cetera, which I understand stands for questioning and gay, or queer, questioning and queer, excuse me. And when you confuse this and you get clowns like Wade going around, pushing this 11-year-old boy to be a sissy, it's bad. And by the way, you know what the solution is to freaks like that is the kids themselves. See, they suppress the kids now. Back in my day, they'd be talking about, man, what's wrong with you, man? What happened? Your daddy put one up your butt, man? Hey, that's why you turned, man? Your dad that way, man. I know we all thought he was in the closet, man. Why don't you just tell your dad, come on out the closet instead of trying to see you? What you do, man? You don't even know what to do, man. You so punked out, man. You should have been in the room the other night, man, when I snuck over there and I was in the bed with your mama, man. You didn't even know. We used to call it running the dozen. We did it for amusement during the lunch break and recess, whatever, when we were in elementary, junior high, and high school.
Yes.
See, but they're too delicate. They want you to be delicate, unmanly.
Oh, touchy.
And they want to push that. See, it's part of the propaganda platform campaign. What did Adolph's boys say? Joseph Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, he said, tell a lie long enough, loud enough, and often enough, and you can get anyone to believe it. A lie told one time is a lie. Told 1,000 times, it becomes the truth. Told well enough, and under the right circumstances, even the victims of your lie will accept the lie as true. If you tell a lie properly and get it accepted, you can see that people start arguing in terms of justifying the lie.
Right. And so
you know you have succeeded at that point. That's what we're doing. They got the lie spread, and too many people today argue in terms of the acceptability of the premise. What is the favorite word? Toxic masculinity.
Correct.
That was a term that was brought about 50 years ago on college campuses by the feminists and their lackey running dogs and queer folk. And I take their definition of it. So they pushed this concept that all masculinity was toxic, and the way to deal with getting rid of it was to start on it one piece at a time. And what they're actually talking about is not anything toxic except behavior that lacks masculinity, because masculinity is not how buff you are, how long you've been in the gym. It's about an attitude and worldview that if you input into a boy produces men of principle and purpose who have ethics, morality, duty, honor, and obligation. They're men of peace, public dignity, and order who can become brave and courageous when necessary. Yes. Masculinity is a code of conduct that is internalized by appropriately socialized and acculturated male youth. Now, they want to make it into something else. This other favorite term of theirs is homophobic. Homophobic is a term that's about 5 years old, but if you input it into your smartphone, it'll accept it and put up a rainbow or something like that. If you put in heterophobic, it'll underline it in red. I know on iPhones it does. And that's like no such word, but actually it's a 200-plus-year-old word. It's phobia is an unreasoning fear of something. It may have a rational basis. But for the preceding 200 years until very recently, homosexuals were lynched, beat up, jacked up, murdered,
persecuted,
fired, put in jail, and they had a real reason to have a phobia of straight people, hence heterophobia. So if you go to an old dictionary, you'll find heterophobia, but not homophobia. But the propaganda engine now pushes homophobic without recognizing heterophobic, which is the real term. See, the average straight person, doesn't have an unreasoning fear of gay folks. He just doesn't like it.
Right.
But you see, once they got into this thing of it's okay to do what you want in your bedroom, that's as far as they needed to go, because nobody needs to know what you do. I mean, should we have a Pride Month or week for those who like to do it doggy style, or missionary style, or riding cowgirl, or cowgirl wide, or the double split? I mean, goodness. Now, it does have there was some need. I'll tell you a funny story. I tried a case as a lawyer. 1980. The case originated in 1979. There was a man and a woman on trial as defendants. They were looking at 3 to 15 years in the state penitentiary. What happened was the guy had a house he bought before he got married, so he got to keep it. The wife was ordered to surrender the keys and move out. She did, but she kept the copy. So she wanted to go by there and get some stuff out of it. So she snuck by on the lunch hour. The guy, her estranged husband, did not have his car parked out front. He and his new girlfriend had ridden in her car and parked around the corner, and they were inside. So the estranged wife used her key, went in, and she espied her estranged husband and his new girlfriend on the couch going down on each other. So she flagged down a cop, and he arrested them for unnatural sex acts, 3 to 15 years in the state penitentiary.
Wow.
So the jury is listening to this. Are you serious? I believe, Mr. Thompson, if you await the judge court's instructions, or you will be informed that's exactly why we are here. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the court will advise you that that is why we are here. These two have been charged for unnatural sex acts for engaging in mutual consensual oral sex with each other.
Mm.
So something like that needed to be changed.
Oh,
yes. That didn't fit. But after you get these things where your bedroom is your castle, so to speak, this thing where you got to be given license to corrupt children. I mean, minors can't drink alcohol. They can't smoke tobacco. They can't vote. They can't sign contracts. They cannot consent to sex. So how in the devil are they going to make a life-shattering change if they decided that they were girls before their hormones kick in to define what they are?
Exactly.
And then, like on this Wade child thing, so that he can be given hormones so that his puberty doesn't happen and this stuff doesn't kick in. That's crazy.
He wants his boy to sing Castrata.
Children for sexual activity of any sort, but they get to. You got reading hours where they got transvestites reading to the children. What is the purpose? They wanted to have Billy Porter with his freak self up on Sesame Street.
Yes.
To give an image to these children of a male in a dress. And see, you're not a man just because you have XY chromosomes. You're a man because you earned the type.
Correct.
You have to be a male to be a man, but you can't be a man just because you're a male. It takes more. It takes action.
Yes.
So, it's what they're doing. And I have a curse. I can remember everything vividly back to when I was a year and a half old, which some uncomfortable, embarrassing moments, that a lot of people don't recall. But I very vividly remember the discussions we had on the playground when I was 6, 7, 8, 9 years old about the movies we had seen at the Saturday matinee the week before. We jumped up on benches and acted out Godzilla and everything and stuff like that. Talked about what happened in the war movies we saw and this, that, and the other cowboy movie or whatever it may be. And we tried to copy what was going on. I mean, mostly they were white actors, but we didn't know the difference then. We just did it as a man thing. And what are they putting out here for these kids to ideate on and to internalize as acceptable and appropriate to guide themselves? It's sick.
It is extremely sick. But it's by design. It's like you said, 5 people.
The tranny thing is bad. See, all mammals, all birds, they have sexual identities based on olfactory, auditory, or visual.
Right.
In other words, they can either smell it. A horse at a distance, you might not be able to tell a mare, but the horse stallions or even the neutered male horses can still smell the difference between a male horse and a female.
Yep.
Lions have manes, that's visual. Humans have sexual dimorphism and distinct characteristics that distinguish male from female, so it's visual. Auditory, the male bird sings a song or makes certain noise, or the male crocodile does, and the females don't. There are all these things. So humans since we're all visual, we look. And in our culture worldwide, nobody walks around naked commonly. So the clothes, as a cultural adaptation, have come to reflect what's underneath them.
Yes.
And when you get these trannies screwing up the works, and they want to disguise what's underneath them and deceive others into what they're looking at. And why is that important? Well, there's one way of looking at all of evolution. You're born or you're hatched. You grow to sexual maturity. You find a mate or mates. You reproduce. You do what you do, whether or not that's anything for the next generation, and then you die. So it's all about the reproductive process, and everything else is attendant on that. So these people want to screw up what Mother Nature has been doing from 3.8 to 4 billion years on this planet. Off of some little safety bubble they found themselves in over the last 35, 40, 50 years.
But they
want to screw it up because they don't like what they are. See, in the 60s, black folk were into self-hate because we never saw ourselves in the movies or anything, on television or anything. And we decided to fight that. And we came up with the concept, I'm black and I'm proud. Black pride. Not James Brown, he co-opted it, but I'm black and I'm proud. I'm power, black power, you know.
Right.
And these people right now that are pushing all of this in the press are deep into self-hate. They hate what they are and they hate what they want to be. And they want everybody else to join in the hate because misery loves company.
Yes.
So they're pushing this thing that people that hate what they are so bad, they want to give the appearance of being something else.
And that's,
so are we all supposed to buy into the self-hate again? And see, that's the other thing. They found out something easily, but that black folk are particularly easily manipulated because in the 60s, there had been this long period of time where we just didn't see each other in anything other than the meaning role. So then when they started putting aggressive roles, they quickly morphed them from just aggressive to glorifying dysfunction. Right. So just like we, some decades before when I was in elementary school, we guided ourselves on what we saw in the movies. These young kids guided themselves off of what they saw in the dysfunctional black exploitation movie. And every time the white movie industry wants cash flow, they put on a carefully crafted black exploitation movie that's guaranteed to bring in a lot of black box office dollars, like Black Panther.
Yep.
That's the highest grossing superhero movie ever. And interestingly enough, America's largest predominantly black city, Memphis, Tennessee, had the highest box office in the nation. Now, let's take the Black Panther. What's going on behind it? Walt Disney bought the rights to this from Marvel. Why did they buy it? Well, in 2011, they got a final judgment against them by the cast and crew of So You Want to Be a Millionaire. And the case had been pending for 9 years until the Ninth Circuit resolved it with a full panel, and the U.S. Supreme Court said it's going to stand. The original plaintiffs were asking for about $7 million. But what wound up happening is the Ninth Circuit awarded them $680 million to punish Walt Disney and ABC for their misdeeds. So right now, with the unpaid interest and the compounding, et cetera, that judgment is somewhere around $1.2 billion.
Wow.
So the plaintiffs essentially own all of the major rides at Disney World and Disneyland, and they get total income for that, less what's necessary to keep the rides and the place in operation, and they're getting the highest sheriff to levy and execute on ABC property all over America. So ABC and Disney needed cash flow to pay down the interest. They got all kinds of credit, lines of credit and finance, but they don't have cash on hand. So they used Black Panther to get black people to come out and do box office, which generated enough cash to keep them out of bankruptcy by being able to pay down some of the interest.
So we bailed them out. We literally bailed out.
That's our economic power, but that's how it gets used and abused, and we're stupid enough to go get used. You take Black Panther, and all of the black folk wanted to see it. I guess they were starved for imagery, but the major fight scene in there is the women of the tribe trying to kill the men of the tribe and vice versa, and some outsiders who lived in caves in the snow. And remember, this is supposed to be in Africa, but they got them in the snow and in caves, which is a reference to Ice Age Neanderthals, which is another reference, a negative on black men. They had a former white CIA pilot operating the virtual flight machine, not anybody black. There were no black men in any positive roles at all. They were all subservient. When you saw the halls of science in Wakanda, all you saw was female scientists, and in one shot there's a male pushing a cart way in the background. When you got the marketplace, all the males were subservient. When you got the formal ceremony, the males were all back on a wall and the women were down front. The king, instead of taking care of the business of Wakanda, was running around in tights playing vigilante to help out a few white folk. You got Killmonger's father, who was with him in a project identified as being on the West Coast. He was the only boy that had a father, and the father was trying to enlighten and revolutionize the young brothers in those projects, but they killed him off.
Right.
He was the one that graduated from college, MIT, as a rocket scientist at 19 years old, at the top of his class, joined the Navy, got to be a SEAL, became a badass, got the nickname Killmonger, studied revolution, and he was going to unify Africa using Wakanda's technology and then take over the world and impose peace. And he was made to be the villain. And they had him spouting Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, even, W.E. Du Bois, some of King's things. And they made him the villain. And they got this handkerchief-head pussy who walks out with two bald-head, tall, otherwise attractive female bodyguards who weren't his bodyguards. They were his managers. And they bossed him. And his mama ran the kingdom. And his aunt was the prime minister. The only man in there was that fool with the lip plate that was acting as a stand-in preacher. It was disgraceful. And we just loved it. And by the way, the one person that plays Black Panther, they also had him as the actor playing Thurgood Marshall, and he looks nothing like Thurgood Marshall. They had him playing Jackie Robinson. He looks nothing like Jackie Robinson. But they also had him playing the God of Wisdom in this interesting movie called The Gods of Egypt. And the God of Wisdom in this movie was a flaming faggot. Flaming. And he was just dancing and prancing around in his robes and everything else. And that's part of the LGBT strategy of having select gay actors play parts that enables the public to come to perceive them as both male and female. Wow. When you think of a John Wayne movie, who identifies with the character he's playing? It's John Wayne. Right. When you see a Clint Eastwood movie, who identifies with the character other than maybe Dirty Harry? It's Clint Eastwood. You know, when you see a Sidney Poitier movie, who identifies the character? It's Sidney Poitier. So you got a gay boy who's been playing gay parts and some straight parts. So you think of gender is fluid. See, I work on your mind, and they plot this out. That's why I got a little bit of negative stuff about saying I don't think they need to Harriet Tubman on a $20 bill. The sister was courageous, but the whole idea started up, and I heard them plotting this almost, 18 years ago now, out there in Paramount Studio. These lesbians, feminists, had a big luncheon, and they were talking about how to get a woman on a bill. And they said Susan B. Anthony was too racist. So then they ultimately came up with, let's get a black woman and in the studio was going to do a movie way back when on Harriet Tubman, but they were going to cast a white woman as Harriet Tubman, and even the current director of the current Harriet, the movie, says they wanted a white woman in there, and he said, but she was black. They said, well, it's been so long ago, nobody will remember. And they picked her, and there were some other unflattering reasons why they wanted her, and one of their conscious objectives was to further put a dig in the black man situation by dissing the men. Now, if you were in Tahiti, all of their money has women on it. Every single bill has nothing but women. But it's interesting. There's a light-skinned Polynesian woman on one side and a dark-skinned Fiji Island-looking woman on the other side of every bill they got. But you see, that's their rule. But in America, the rule is you put dead presidents and a few others like Ben Franklin, who was never a president, on the bill, or you put somebody who was Secretary of the Treasury on a really big bill. So why not put Frederick Douglass, Mr. Black Superman, who was all of our current heroes rolled into one? He helped start the Republican Party after he violently escaped from slavery and beat his former master and shot a few white boys who were trying to catch him. He isolated the South by a speaking campaign all through Europe during the Civil War to keep them from selling the South arms. He organized the 54th Massachusetts Colored Volunteers that his son enlisted in, and one of them got sons enlisted in, and one of them got killed in action. He personally had a great deal to do with the language and the drafting of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. I mean, what more can you do when they don't put this man on a bill?
Exactly.
You know, why do you change the rule? Because the rule in America is at all costs, at all times, all opportunities, you must, at all expense, down the black man, and you must never give him respect. See, I unfortunately do not forget 50 years ago when I was working at this DC think tank as an intern, and I'm researching the slave pamphlets, which were slave pamphlets on microfilm in the Library of Congress. And that's one of the methodologies of imposing slavery. Make sure that black males are never acknowledged as having any virtue. Always recognize the black female with gray hair, but never the black male with gray hair. See, so this is just a continuation of this, and this is exactly what these lesbian feminists were talking about. And here we are allotted out. Nobody asked anybody black about it. And 6 years ago, it came up again. They couldn't get any steam off of it. They said, we have to put our propaganda engine to play on it. And they came up with Harry. So now everybody wants, you know, what they want. Nobody asked black folks. What about Martin Luther King? Well, he's got a holiday. Well, so does Abraham Lincoln, and so does Washington, too. But they're on coins and bills.
Yes.
Excuse me. And you got Benjamin Franklin, and arguably Ben Franklin didn't do as much for the country as, say, Martin Luther King did, or Frederick Douglass did, or how about ending segregation? It's not a matter of integrating. Segregation was, I'm sorry, you can't go over there. You ain't allowed. You can't go down that street. Better not drive through here after dark, boy. I don't care whether you got to go 5 miles that way to get to where you live. See, that's segregation. So what about Thurgood Marshall masterminding what came to be Brown v. Board of Education? All right, how about it? Being a dignified, intelligent person on the U.S. Supreme Court who did us a lot of good. And by the way, he was no pussy. Thurgood Marshall was known for jacking up racists with a baseball bat. And he usually made arrangements that when he went someplace to start trying to deal with litigation that was necessary, he'd make arrangements for somebody to have him a 12-gauge pump ready to go.
He wasn't
and preferred Winchester Model 97 12-gauge trench guns or riot guns. So, I mean, we don't honor these people. A third, Denmark Vesey, who was a free man in the Carolinas, who was a carpenter who tried to lead the slaves in revolt and got betrayed by some slaves. Nat Turner. How about the Chief Osceola, half black, her father was a runaway slave, mother was a Seminole Indian. He became a chief. They got Osceola, Arkansas down here, right down the road from me. What about him? Or speaking of which, you're going to diss all of these Native Americans? What about Flying Cloud, Chief Sitting Bull, Chief Flying Horse, you've got all sorts of Native American chiefs. Tecumseh, whatever. But don't forget, you got all of these Hispanics that are now the largest minority in the country. What about all of them that got displaced or run out or did something? And you ignore them? So you can get, as per the feminist, a female don't care who. Break all the rules.
Break all the rules.
So black folk will never have a black man on a bill. They got a black woman who she supposedly bravely saved 250 people, but what about the ones that influenced and impacted millions?
Maybe that's
and I think Harriet Tubman, from what I've heard, would be very disenchanted, be flattered in one sense, but very disenchanted if she knew she was being used for a divisive purpose.
Yeah. Well, there it is.
If we don't think, we accept what these folks throw at us. Some white lesbian feminists decided to come up with this, so now we think we did.
But it's to our detriment, lesbian, Judge.
But I don't like feminists.
It's to our detriment that we follow these people who are basically, to a certain degree, anti-human, at least in terms of normal procreation. I mean, I also done a show recently where we discuss how like white parents would adopt black children and they would basically abuse these children, like use them as slaves.
Charlize Theron.
Do you think there should be some sort of correction in that? Maybe vetting people more, especially when it comes to black children being adopted out?
You know what? I've got a goddaughter who was born in Russia. She was adopted by some neighbors that I had out in California. And the Russians won't let Americans adopt any more Russian children because of the prototype for Charlize Theron. Did you see that thing that's made around on Twitter? She got that kid in that pink girl swimsuit with his little dick punching through at the bottom. And all of the hair braided like she's got it braided, and then she's got him in other pictures paraded in dresses and everything like that. And then the other one she calls My Little Lizard, because when I saw him first, she met him and her heart just broke. He had some kind of skin rash or something like that. He wears a dress too. That sick puppy of a woman needs to be locked up for child abuse.
Yes.
And this Wade character needs to be arrested and charged with child abuse. Now, different states have different terms for it and different specifications, but that's basically what it is. An 11-year-old hasn't even got the hormones. His balls haven't even dropped. He doesn't even have hairy balls yet, on hair on his arm, under his armpit, or on his face. So how the hell is he going to say he thinks he's a girl? And what the hell happened to this thing where society acculturates its children so they have the proper outlook for their role? I mean, if somebody wants to play freak, queer, as LGBTQ stands for in its name, then it's an anomaly. But you don't try to make that the normalcy.
Right.
Unless perhaps it's a latent population control device that humanity has evolved without realizing it to control its excess population because we have no natural enemy anymore.
The coronavirus is
we do have a few.
The virus is like in China, you know, the Wuhan epidemic or you know, however that contagion came about. I guess at this point it's really kind of irrelevant. But do you think the numbers are actually accurate coming out of China, or do you think they're fudging them?
Probably. They got such a bad thing from the last time they had a problem. See, the reason China gets problems, we don't. We have 300-some million people. China has 300-some million plus another billion on top of it. So that's a lot of people crowded into close, compacted areas where it's very easy for a virus to propagate. The virus originated with bats. It mutated upon contact with pigs, and now it is subject to being passed by humans. But that's evolution. You know, a lot of people won't accept that, but it's also indicative of we can't be safe. And by the way, scientists have been predicting that for several years. They also have one they're predicting, which is a return or revival of something that went around 100 years ago called the Spanish flu.
Yes.
It actually originated in the United States, but people were too ignorant in the U.S. to accept that, and they claimed it came from Spain. But Spanish flu was unusual. Back then, the death toll in the United States was about 18 million people died of it. And they are expecting it to come back worse for a number of reasons, because it has mutated, evolved. And guess what? I'm not getting any flu shot. That's just something, you know, these white folk are doing because, you know, they're trying to do biological engineering on us.
So people aren't getting vaccinated against the flu is the cause?
No, they're not. And see, well, what's wrong with people catching the measles? I'm not having my child get the measles. They may get autistic. Maybe there's a slim chance. But see, I grew up where they didn't have a vaccination for measles or chicken pox or mumps or whooping cough. And I caught all of it. Hell, that was not pleasant. And see, when we had measles epidemics, class, Johnny won't be returning. We need to bow our heads, or we need to give a moment's silence for Johnny. And, you know, Susan in room B13, she won't be coming back either. Every time we had an epidemic, somebody in the school would die. But nobody wants to do that. I have a friend who's an executive manager, director with the CDC down there. She had a month and a half she had to spend up in New York. She said they had 60-some people died up there of the flu, a measles epidemic outbreak. But people don't want to get shot for that, you know. I remember when I was a kid, when they invented the polio vaccine, everybody was lined up, anxiously awaiting their turn to be vaccinated. Yeah, some people had a negative reaction to it, but so many people got paralyzed that literally in the summer, everybody that could would try to leave town and travel to visit relatives. But that always wound up transmitting the contagion to somebody out of the big cities. But people stayed in their houses when there was an outbreak. Franklin Delano Roosevelt caught it as an adult, and he was crippled for the rest of his life and had to move around in a wheelchair.
Yep.
I knew Wilma Rudolph. She became a good fan. She was the sister who won all the Olympic medals back in the early 60s. She had to recover from that. She told me how horrible that was. We used to see pictures of kids in what they called iron lungs.
Yes.
When their muscles stopped working. So they put these kids in a device with a tight feel around their neck that made them feel like they were choking. And they would put vacuum in and then put pressure in so the vacuum would work their chest so they could breathe. So, you know, they had to piss on themselves and stuff like that. So, I mean, it was hard. So people don't want to be vaccinated for that stuff. But you see, the problem with vaccination is that if you vaccinate everybody, you make the disease go extinct. If you don't vaccinate everybody, then some can catch it.
Right.
And the some that can catch it can infect those who have a degree of immunity that isn't quite high enough, even though they got vaccinated.
That is true.
So we don't deal with science. Why? We're off into this belief thing. We go to church, got Jesus down, you know, and all kinds of nonsense we pick up on the net. But we don't understand science, technology, engineering, and math. And we tend to talk about this some white folk conspiracy, this white supremacy, trying to do this where they're going to give a different vaccine to black folk to kill us all. Oh, come on. Like some of the people that are involved are black folk, and there are some black doctors that would urge you to get vaccinated too for your own well-being.
Oh, but they're not going to hear that, Judge. Oh, they're already paid off by Big Pharma, you know. But back to...
And actually, it's not Big Pharma. It's not the pharmaceutical companies that are the problem. It's the medical insurance companies that are the problem. Not general insurance, but medical insurance. We love Obamacare, and everybody's defending Obamacare, but actually it's horrible. And guess what? Obama had nothing to do with it. Republican senior senator from the state of Tennessee, Dr. Bill Frist, drafted it when he was Republican Senate Majority Leader in 2003. Frist family founded Blue Cross Blue Shield and most of the HMOs, and they get the lion's share of the benefits from affordable health care. And he drafted it, but he couldn't get it through. But the Obama administration got it through in 2010, so it's known as the Obamacare Act, but it's not. It's Bill Frist, the Republican Act. That's why 2 years ago, when they had that big to-do about hearings behind closed doors, what actually happened. Hell, Tommy, why didn't somebody tell me this is our folks came up with this? I thought this was that Democratic stuff. Hell, man, them people done gave me thousands of dollars for campaign purpose. I can't go get them. What we gonna do? But they just left it as it is.
And that's where we're at.
And we lied it out sitting there rah-rahing something that was not for us. For example, I'm a type 2 diabetic, so I can afford to get the stuff I need, but it's interesting. One medication, if I get a 30-day supply, my copay with the upscale Blue Cross insurance is $473 for 30-day supply. If I get a 90-day supply, guess what? The entire copay for 90 days is only $17. Why? Because if you read it, the federal government has to reimburse Blue Cross 100% for their payout for the drug. They get benefit of my premium that I have paid them. They get benefit of my copay. And since they are trying to push me to take a generic, which I won't do, if I did that, they would get 100% reimbursement for the cost of the generic. So why give it to Blue Cross so Bill Frist's family can get wealthier, when you can just pay it out for the people?
Now, what's the rationale about not using generics?
One side of that equation is good, and hell, Trump is good. He's trying to sit there and end that little sop to these folks that Bill Frist family represents that he didn't even like. And we're going, we need to all trying to read what you got in there. Or like this one. I get Blue Cross through SAG-AFTRA, so I know what I pay per month as a premium, right?
Right.
Blue Cross wants me to switch over to Medicare. So if I get Medicare to pick up type A and B coverage, it would cost me more per month for that through Blue Cross than it cost me to get deluxe care coverage for everything.
Man.
It's a racket.
It is a huge racket. But it's a
And
racket
as
that you can't live without.
it is, if you get Medicare, okay, you're stuck in that loop. I won't, but if you collect Social Security, and I delayed it until I was 70, I get maximum benefits, but to get it, you have to agree to take Part B, which is hospitalization, so that a hospital can't come after you and get all of your money that you're getting from Social Security to pay for a hospital bill that you can't cover, that the feds can cover under Part B. They just don't want their money being wasted. Mm. And by the way, I would strongly suggest anybody who is listening, particularly those in their mid to late 30s, to be very cognizant of your retirement plan. You do have one, don't you? Some colleagues of mine are really upset who were state judges who got elected to multiple terms, which gives them full coverage. I got elected to 2 8-year terms. I get full coverage. But you know what my pension from the state of Tennessee is for being a judge?
How much?
I get $1,873 a month.
Damn.
That ain't shit. But I got other benefits.
So, I mean, but you can tie that with obviously your TV money and all of that. So it all compensates.
Yeah. And I set up some retirement plans, but see, most people don't. So I've got some now recently retired judicial colleagues who are singing the blues because they had no idea how little they were going to get.
Well, they might need to move to Puerto Rico or someplace cheap where you can live like a king for $100 a month.
Nobody wants to uproot. You got to go buy a new house, everything else, and how you going to do it? You got no income. So a lot of them, once they find that, they withdraw their resignations or their retirement. They keep on, and they're 83, 84, 85 years old because they can't afford to retire.
Because their standard of living goes down.
But they're still able, the wisdom doesn't hurt. A lot of what being a judge is about is just knowledge of life, and having been there, seen that, done that, experienced that, and encountered it before to know what happens is the long-term consequence of what you rule.
See, this is what
we wanted new and improved kids in high school. Say, my ambition is to be a judge. Why? You don't even know what the hell it's about. Why would you want to be something you know nothing about? Well, no, don't worry about what you see on TV. That isn't what the real deal is. You need to be knowledgeable about life. You need to know what it's about to have to get up every damn day when you don't want to because you got kids to support, you got mortgages to pay, utilities for the house, car notes, put something in the savings account, buying groceries, dealing with incidentals, what you put in what. You need to know all these things. You need to see what happens when some of the clients you got earlier in your career start getting old and start having to rely upon those wills that you wrote for them. So you need to find these things out so you know about life and you can be judicious. Now, a lot of judges are damn fools. You can't get away from that. Some of them are incompetent, but most are okay. They are even better when they're responsive to what you do on election day if you don't have a corrupted election process and somebody handing you out a sample ballot with a bunch of strangely missing pictures for the judicial candidates who have paid good money to somebody to put them on the ballot. We had a former Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, chairman of the White Citizens Council, who kept getting the black bloc vote for years. He was a criminal court judge, and he was one sick puppy.
How was he able to achieve that?
I told him off a whole lot of times once I got on the bench.
See, this is what I'm talking about, is that people don't understand. When you have a KKK member as a judge, isn't that the equivalent of having an ISIS or Al-Qaeda member as a judge?
Yeah, but they want Sharia law. That's for some people is a good thing. And then don't forget all of the feminists who are running around talking about we ought to be able to influence a child, and all these people that wanted to go demonstrate on the Supreme Court steps about this farce with somebody trying to get some play with the networks because he couldn't get what he wanted pushing black reruns. So you want to go influence the court because you're upset? Hell, that's mob justice. You really want that? Because remember, you can do it being self-righteous, but the Klan can too.
Correct. That's why the idea of
careful what you ask for, you just might get it.
Well, in closing, do you think that we as a nation should strive to be a republic or a democracy?
You don't want a democracy.
But that's what the Democrats say. The process, we're democratic. It's all about democracy. Why is democracy a bad idea versus a republic?
Well, because at that point, there had been a couple of 100 years of warfare in Europe and a lot of hashing out of what both terms meant. And they came up with a pretty good document with the Constitution. See, it's based on the Roman Republic. We have the House of Representatives that's equivalent of the Roman Assembly of Plebes, and we have the Senate, which is an exact component, counterpart for the Roman Senate. The method of selection is different, but the function is the same. So the method of selection of the representatives and senators and chief executive is somewhat democratic, but they weren't expected to take a poll or an opinion poll every time they got ready to do something. They were expected to use wisdom.
Correct.
So they were just as autocratic as a potentate or a monarch. The only difference is they periodically came up for review and approval, and people would say we liked the job or we didn't like the job.
Well, we have to come to a realization, at least on this program, democracy is bad because it's quite literally two racist white men and one black man voting on who does the crap work. And underneath that dynamic, I think it's safe to say you better grab your shovel, brother, because you're going to get the vote to be at the bottom of the totem pole every time.
Okay. Let me interject something here. Yeah. Racism exists. It's a form of xenophobia, fear of or repugnance for the strange or unusual. All humans suffer from it. It's a human characteristic. We do too. How badly do we talk about white folks in public? How badly do we talk about them in private? Do you honestly expect the white people to be any different in that respect than you are?
No, not honestly. You're correct.
Look how we talk about these gay folks. You honestly expect anybody to be any different? And see, this is the other thing too. There's a certain amount of hypocrisy. It's like Orwell's Animal Farm, where all animals were equal, but the pigs were more equal than other animals. So you have this in place, and you've got characters, particularly on the far left, where they're justified in their assessment of reality by pet beliefs. And it's not a good thing because they adopt this by any means necessary, and one of the means is to abolish or disregard or diffuse or diminish the protections of the Bill of Rights. And that kind tend to lapse into dictatorships. For example, right now, if you look at the American History Channel or the Military Channel or the Smithsonian Channel, Comcast or cable. They're talking about the night of the long knives, what Hitler did. And one of his motives was to, get rid of the SA, the stormtroopers. They had about 3.5 million armed people. And the other one was to get rid of his history as a homosexual, of which there is still an extensive amount in circulation.
The pink swastika.
Well, no, I'm not worried about the swastika. The swastika is ancient. The Native Americans used it. The Chinese used it. Rome used it as a frequent decoration in their uniforms. So Hitler picked it because it was on a church portal where he attended. And the church got it from ancient times. So the swastika is an ancient human emblem. It just got co-opted into something dreadful.
Extremely dreadful.
Hitler didn't invent it, neither did the Nazis. They co-opted it. Just like Aryan Superman, blonde-haired, blue-eyed giants from the far north. There are Aryans, and they're known as Indo-Aryans. And if you want to see what one actually looks like, look at Kamala Harris. She is an Aryan. She is a Hindu Brahmin. She's paper bag brown with long, coarse, wavy hair. That's what they look like.
So how does
not blonde-haired, blue-eyed, but you see the concept was co-opted.
Right. Sort of like when people say like the Jews that are running Israel today are not genetically, biologically speaking, the same people that were written of in the Bible. In other words, they co-opted that identity as well.
Well, they inbred in Europe. A lot of people, white folk, have European Jew in them, from especially the Spaniards. People from Spain, I mean, that's just what it was. Genetically, a lot of Jews are identical to a lot of Arabs. In fact, anthropology, the origin of the white folk are known as marsh Arabs.
They were northern Arabs?
No, they were known as marsh Arabs, M-A-R-S-H, spreading from the Middle East. At that point in time, the Middle East was not arid. It was lush and infused with water, hence marshes and swamps.
Wow. So why has all this history been so distorted and basically...
Because they didn't know. You get out of pocket, so you have no pocket phone, communications devices, no ground lines, no telegraph, no newspapers, no mail, and you get gone for 15 years, you're completely out of touch. Nobody has any writing to record it. Everything is word of mouth. So they re-encounter 48 years later, and there might be legends, but 250 years later, nobody knows who's who. So xenophobia kicks in, the fear of the stranger. Europe suffered from it badly. Up until fairly recently, your typical European peasant had never been more than 5 to 10 miles from where he was born.
Right.
And his whole life.
Well, wasn't that because they were quite literally tied to work in the land? Like, essentially, they were slaves.
Well, they didn't have horses. The nobility of the upper classes had those. They had to walk. So how far are you going to walk where you got to go back home because you don't have the wherewithal to stay in the inn?
So when we look at this whole paradigm that we're in right now, you know, basically the United States society as a whole, it was founded on basically a man being a man going out subduing the land, maybe even exploiting other people. But this is the foundation of this nation. How can we change this dynamic to possibly become more unified?
You're not going to unless you have an outside entity that is more different than the people who are inside. That's human nature.
So we're quite literally waiting on the alien invasion to finally wake up and be like, hey, we're all humans. We're in this together.
I was going to say that.
Well, the way NASA's...
By the way, getting off planet would be pretty good for human development because the people off planet would view themselves as more similar to each other by dint of their journey than those left behind. So the people on Earth would look at themselves more likely as more familiar than those who left.
Correct. So it would be almost like a form of new nationalism, like back in the day before racism was a thing. Everyone was kind of identified by what nation you came from or what tribe you came from versus your skin complexion.
Well, it's like this. In 66 AD, William the Conqueror, formerly known as William the Bastard, Duke of Normandy, defeated Harold at Hastings. Harold had defeated another Harold, Harold Hardrada, who was the last of the Vikings, further north up in England after a forced march and came back down, and he got shot through the eye, and William's boys took over. William's boys subjected the Saxons to a form of slavery. William's folk were Normans. They had an ancestor who they detailed in the Vikings, whose name was Rollo. They even had that in the Viking bit. Remember, he's brother of the protagonist in the first two seasons of Vikings.
Right.
And Hugh Capet was elected King of France by his peers, elected, not born. And he worked out a deal with Rollo, and he gave him some land that was subsequently known as Normandy. In other words, Norse land, meaning from the north. Ragnar Lothbrok is the character in the Vikings, and there actually was a Ragnar Lothbrok. There was also Ivar the Boneless, who's famous in English and Anglo-Saxon history. But anyway, the Normans came in and conquered the Saxons, and they essentially made slaves of them. Interestingly enough, that was in 1066. About 450-60 years later, they start settling the Americas. And interestingly enough, they started imposing on the slaves they started bringing in the 16th century. Exactly the same conditions that they themselves had endured as subjects of the Normans. Most of the American settlers were descendants of the Saxons rather than of the Normans. The Normans tended to be the aristocracy.
Right.
Okay. What happened was interesting. The Normans found the situation where the Saxons and the Angles, the mix-up of the Celts and the Saxon invaders, had produced a similar society. When the Normans came in and took over, well, the Saxons and the Celts and the Angles, whatever they wanted to call themselves, they became one the way they looked at themselves. A lot of Norman commoners came over from Normandy, but they got included in the Norman aristocracy because they were part of the conquerors. They got land, and whereas they had been castigated for being commoners before, they were now looked at as part of the ruling caste. You see, when you have somebody to subjugate, when you have somebody that you can identify with or who identifies with you as part of the important caste, you move up in status. Now, that brings us to our problem as a black folk. We have all heard the term melting pot, have we not?
Correct.
The melting pot seems to work for everybody but us, right?
Right.
That's because we are the catalyst that allows the melting pot. It is what I call the Joe Brown one block rule. From one block away, you can identify a black person, whereas you cannot identify a Mexican, a Chinese, Italian, an Irishman, a Frenchman, or a Russian, or even to this extent, in this day and time, a Native American, unless they're wearing their hair and dealing with the wardrobe or the cultural clothing. You can identify a black person from more than a block away, if not by complexion, by hair, most of the time. And most of us have features that are readily identifiable when you close up. So everybody else has been able to melt into the pot because there is this catalyst that's so distinctively different from everybody else, meaning us. See where this goes? So that being our utility, and the fact that you have a large society that's got 3.2 billion people, plus that's not likely to change until there is something on the horizon that makes us more similar to each other than we are different. So what would that be? And I think you're right back to what you said. We're waiting for E.T. to land. See where that goes?
Yep.
Weird. And by the way, you see there can be changes, but it's about complexion. Do you know that until 1878, Irish were considered non-white?
Yes, they were considered the Negroes or niggas.
Well, what happened is because of their service in the Civil War on both sides, they got an act of Congress in 1878 declaring them to be white. Eisenhower issued an executive order in 1954 declaring Mexicans to be white. Now, that was in return for political support. An interesting thing to think about.
It is. It truly is.
We have similar situations. And then you see we had World War II. Japanese had been subjected to some horrible racism. But then in 1945, the U.S. military got exposed to the kamikaze and to the banzai charge. And although there were more Germans than Japanese, the American military said, we can't fight the Japanese. To fight them will produce too many casualties. We took casualties fighting the Germans, but it's going to be much worse fighting the Japanese. These guys are badasses. So you notice nobody's ashamed of being Japanese now. Right. The Japanese are always invited into polite company. They may not run the political game, but they certainly aren't kept out of it. And they certainly run the corporations. And you look around your house and every damn thing in it is made in Japan or China. And what you're driving is likely made in Japan, too.
Well,
or Germany.
If you was a World War II veteran and you was to travel time to today, you'd probably swear that the Axis power won the war.
You might. And let's not even worry about World War II. Let's go buy a pair of Air Jordan tennis or some of the upscale Nikes. You look at them, they get real cute. They don't say made in Vietnam. They say made in Hanoi, Vietnam, which was the capital of Vietnam. Hanoi Hilton, where American prisoners of war were kept and tortured. And all these folks, 52,000 folks, died so that we could go buy $200 tennis shoes.
$200 tennis shoes. You know, Judge, we're going to wrap the show up. We're at like an hour, I think almost 2 hours. No, 2 hours just an hour. Hour 30 minutes. You have anything in closing you want to add to the discussion?
just something brief.
Okay.
Prepare yourself. You should learn science, technology, engineering, and math. They possess the magic formula that lets you play sorcerer or witch in today's world. And that's what you need to make it. We might need land, but it needs to be the right land, because as you'll find out once you get money, it's not just land, it's where it's located. Location is everything.
Yep.
You can get it cheap if it's the wrong place, and it's very expensive if it's in the right place. So if we get the land, or we don't maybe even need the land so much, out in some rural area where you're going to get a modern mule out there, you need to have access to resources and finance. And you need to have a product, and the product is not selling what comes out of mom and pop stores, because that market is glutted. What we need to do is what everybody else in the world is doing, from South America to Africa to Asia to Europe to most of the United States, well, to not so much lately. Science, technology, engineering, and math, and you need to have a Silicon Valley revolution where you come up with something new, where the market's not glutted, and if you got something going on, you can certainly market it.
Yes.
That's what we need to do, but everybody's got these social sciences soft ones, and they're praying to Jesus rather than reading math.
Well, don't you know it's easier to make believe often and self-deceive yourself than actually put in the hard work and the academic scholarship to really know what to know. In other words, it's easier to visualize the heavens, but it's far more difficult to understand how the heavens truly works.
Who cares? Are you going to be around when you die? You afraid to die, or did you live a good life and you don't really care? You need some rest because you're tired of it all.
There it is. That's the question everyone needs to ask themselves today. What type of life have you and are you living? If it's not right, then what are you, the person looking at yourself in the mirror in the morning, going to do to change that situation? You know, and hopes and prayers are good. I mean, for some people, that's what they need to make it through day to day. But when we talk about the tangible resources and the way the world's going, it's not being run on hope and prayers. It's being run by men and women who have a intelligent design and plan that they're implementing. And we either got to find our niche in it, or ultimately, you know, it's sort of like Joseph Goebbels. The propaganda is already against us. So, you know, if the green light's given, it wouldn't really be that hard of a switch to start loading people up onto the proverbial train.
Okay, now one thing I want to add to this mix. Our problem may no longer be principally racism. Our problem and the problem of the whole country may be the destruction of the family and emasculation. We have just become, in essence, the guinea pigs for the process.
Yes. Beta testers. Definitely beta testers. It's sort of like, if it works on us, it'll work on everyone else. You know, remember how they used to say, if you can't do it to an animal, then you can't do it to a human, or vice versa, maybe.
Yeah, that was the theory about, that was the whole thing about how we got rid of segregation. Thurgood Marshall crafted a plan that took over from what the NAACP was doing. The Jews supported black folks because they said, if you can't do it to a Negro, you can't do it to a Jew.
Correct.
And they came up with the idea of using the ASPCA laws, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animal laws. And the theory was, is if you couldn't do it to a dog, you couldn't do it to a Negro. You couldn't do it to a Negro, you couldn't do it to a Jew. They stopped financing it when it got to the point where it no longer was doing them any good. And then they switched to the new elective minority, LGBTQ, who they might have relatives, it looked like. And you see all these commercials, two kinds that are interesting. The ones, disabled veterans, $19 and some cents a month to help out the vets. Good idea. There's also $19 a month in some odd sense to help out Charlie, who's been in this poor cage out in the cold, and he may never know love.
You still won't after they take their 70% of your donation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See where that goes? When you get into what the consequences are, they have a need for altruism. So we used to be the two-legged pet dogs that they could see poor Sammy. He's out in the back, out in the cold in his shack with no gas. And he's kept down there, and we need to help him out, you know. And they got, look at these poor people. They're suffering. They can't have their naked butts out here and their weenies hanging out in the gay pride parade. We need to help them. And look, they need to have their feelings. If they want to play freak, then they need to be able to go in the girls' bathroom and take a piss with all the rest of the girls that they wish they were.
You see how they jumped, how they use this tactic. You can totally see it, especially when you put it like that.
See, so, I mean, we got to watch out. Ain't nobody talking about us being out in the cold anymore. Then in $19.95 a month, if you want to save a Negro from being out there, you know?
No, he didn't. $19.95 to save a Negro. And he would get 75%.
$29.95 still got a freak, you know? I mean, he needs to be able to get his heart's desire together. Help buy him a pink dress for goodness sake.
And don't forget his operations and
$29.95 a month. You can have Shamanella. She can have her heart's content to cover up her dick with a nice pink dress. And then agree when the month after, or she could be playing Rizzo and get out there in front of the Lakers game with a black t-shirt with a fat ass bear and a G-string and start twerking that big behind us at the audience, causing an earthquake up in the pavilion. To catch it up on the seismic devices out there at UCLA where they deal with detecting earthquakes.
I'm just saying, in my mind, I can hear that cheesy little guitar music, ding, ding, ding. And to help a poor Negro, $19.95, but to help a freak, $49.95. Like, yeah. Damn.
$49.95, so Tomanika can buy him herself a new dress. $55 her whole life. She's not been able to swindle her else. And there's makeup that they need. Lipstick that is expensive. Think about it.
But this is the world in which we're in. This mad, upside down, topsy-turvy, crazy world in which we are in. And we have to find...
Now with that, yeah, let me get out of here. It's getting late. It's 4:40. I got some errands to run.
Well, thank you, Judge. I appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, everybody. That was Judge Joe Brown, y'all. And this will conclude TPIM SR Live for today. I want to thank all the chatters and viewers, all the confidential informants, just everyone who has supported and helped the show grow, and grow some more. So today's date, February 22nd, 2020, the year of our Lord. Live your life of integrity without hate, envy, or greed. And as always, brothers and sisters, please, let's try to be kinder to each other. Peace and power, unity and victory, dignity and respect, liberation, and hopefully one day, melanated compensation. or reparations. I'm out.